It's time to look at stories and storytelling a little bit differently. Today, our guest is Noah Lekas, and he is a freelance writer and editor who goes really, really deep into dissecting narratives, when the narrative should be yours, when it shouldn't be yours. What are you participating in creating as a collective and individual narratives? How do narratives intersect? How do narratives help us feel like we are a part of something or not a part of something? And then where do the limitations come in from the narratives that we are telling ourselves? Lots of narrative all over the place in this fascinating conversation that I feel like is like an alternative entree into a lot of the conversations that we've had. But we haven't had it before while talking about Hare Krishna, and we haven't had it before while talking about blue-collar workers, and we haven't had it before from a poet. So this is a unique, special, and incredibly important conversation that I encourage you to dive into. Noah Lekas, again, is a writer and editor and the author of Saturday Night Sage, a collection of narrative poetry about mysticism and menial labor. Yes, I said that right. Mysticism and menial labor. You're going to have to order the book and get all of that wonderfulness together. He's also the former managing editor of Branding Mag and helps brands and thought leaders craft compelling narratives while continuing to contribute to a variety of other publications. And his unique perspective takes narrative and takes story and storytelling to a much more elevated place. So if you're like, okay, Leah, if you don't stop talking about that damn hero's journey, I'm so over it. Well, then, my friend, this episode is for you because we are talking into how to use it and change it and shift it and how to see it in completely new and different ways. All right, let's go.
Welcome to the Flourishing Entrepreneur podcast with Alea Harris. If you're looking for actionable ways to overcome communication and differentiation challenges by sharing radically authentic stories, you are in the right place. Listen in and learn how to stand in the power of your unique narrative to transform your personal life, business, and workplace culture. And now, your host, award-winning international speaker, strategic storytelling consultant, and Japanese whiskey lover, Ruby Coral's mom, Alea Harris.
Noah, thank you so much for joining us here on the Flourishing Entrepreneur podcast. How are you doing today?
Oh, I'm great. Thanks for having me.
I am very excited to have you here because it's not often that we are blessed by the presence of a poet. Yes, you, of course, are a freelance writer and editor, but you have a book of narrative poetry called Saturday Night Sage. Can you tell us a little bit more about that book?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a collection of poetry about, I kind of say it's about mysticism and menial labor. So I'm from a small blue collar factory town in the Midwest and grew up in a household with a lot of divergent religious, let's call them pursuits. So I was around different religions and different ideologies at a young age, which was not maybe the norm in that area. And so I always wrestled with this idea of the narrative that surrounded, it's a short answer, but I always wrestled with the idea of the narrative that surrounded menial work and the sort of blue collar labor that I was born into with the sort of repetitious menial practice of spiritual growth and enlightenment. So the book is kind of me wrestling with those two polar opposites. And the title really came from, there was a pastor that was this pastor of a church who was talking about Easter Sunday. And he was preaching about how you don't get lost on Saturday night, right? Like Friday night is the crucifixion, Sunday is the resurrections. Don't get lost on Saturday night. Don't get lost in your darkest hour, which I found interesting because in the blue collar working world, Saturday night is your night. That's the only one you have. Friday, you're dog tired from working. Sunday is, belongs to God, and Saturday night is your night. And so this idea of the dark night of the soul that somebody just has to get through to get to Sunday, as opposed to the celebration night, and sort of how those interacted with each other and how they played out in my own life as I worked through sort of my experience with Krishna consciousness, Christ consciousness, Buddhism, and different things that I was exposed to as a young person. So there's a lot in it. It's not a beach read, but I think it's honest, and that's all that I can really ever hope for.
Well, and it must also be honestly good, because you shared with me before we started recording that it's in its second printing, correct?
Yeah, it's about to come back out. So the first pressing or the first publishing run of the book sold out. It first came out in 2019, actually in April. So it's almost exactly 5 years old now. And about 2 years in, it sold out, and it's been out of print for 2 years. During COVID, there wasn't a lot of repressing going on, with certain things like that. But now the interest has sort of started to drum back up for it, and the publisher is going to do a second run. And we're really excited about it. I'm very happy to have it back in the world. It's something I'm very, very proud of.
I can hear the pride, and it sounds fascinating. Everything that was coming out of your mouth, I'm like, oh, him and I are going to be great friends. And when it does come out, can people get it on your website, noahlekas.com?
Yeah, it'll be there. It'll be on Amazon again. It'll be on blindowl.com, which is the publisher. It's a record label out of San Diego. That's who. Yeah. So I grew up playing music, and I'm involved in a lot of music things, so that I ended up publishing with a record label, which is a little unorthodox, but it was fun.
That sounds like a lot of fun. Before we were talking, and I'd love to get your take on this, especially given everything that you said, you talked about how you like to dissect narratives. And it sounds to me like you, based on the poetry that you put together, that you like to dissect them, flip them around and reverse them and smush them together and play around with them in all kinds of cool ways. But first of all, can you talk to us about what you mean by dissecting narratives?
Well, this is something that you've talked about with a lot of guests, which is the kind of like the stories that we tell ourselves. And I think it's really, it's very interesting because, one of the best examples is I was a smoker for a long time. I was an avid cigarette smoker. I really enjoyed it. And when I was 20, well, just say 27, it was probably around then that I quit. And one of the steps towards quitting was, I remember somebody's telling me, yeah, it's so hard not to smoke, isn't it? And I remember going home thinking about that and kind of talking with my wife about it. And I'm like, it's kind of crazy because it's actually not. Like, that's such a weird narrative. Like, not smoking means doing nothing. It's the easiest thing I can do is sit here and do absolutely nothing. And smoking means I have to go buy cigarettes. I have to buy a lighter. I have to find a place to smoke. I have to find a place to put the butt when I'm done. I have to smell like smoke. Like, there's all these obstacles. Now, if you're in an environment where it's easier to smoke than not smoke, like if you're out at a bar, I'm going to date myself, but if you're at a bar all night drinking and smoking, it's way harder to not smoke than smoke. But if you're in any other environment, it's actually easier not to. So the narrative is wrong. It's bad thinking. And there's a million of these narratives in our lives. And not even that, but the brands that we buy are selling us usually a bullshit narrative, the products. And it's the difference between understanding your internal locus and your external, because when you have to let go, there are things that are external locus. Like, I can't manifest a better climate for the planet, right? If I could, I would, right? But it's not, like, there are things that are beyond our control, and you have to have grace for yourself for those. But for all the narratives that are internal locus driven, usually it's other people's limiting thinking, not our own. And so you have to just go, like, when a person's like, oh, I tried, I don't just take anything. I tried to be vegan, but I couldn't. Okay. Like, what does that have to do with me? Like, I'm sorry you had that experience. If you're asking me for advice, I can give you some. I'd be happy to. But if you're just telling me it's difficult and you want me to agree that it's too difficult to do, everything's impossible, but people do impossible things every day. So like, that's what I think is fascinating about it. And in every religion, I mean, I'm way more interested in it in terms of spirituality than I am in terms of brands. It's just, I've never had a religion hire me to work for them. So I work for brands. But like, you know, if there's somebody out there who wants to hire me, I'd be happy to come work on some narrative for your church, but or your whatever. It doesn't have to be Christian. But you know, with branding and with all this stuff, like if you look at the narratives, like what do you hear when you go to church? You're told, if you go to a Christian church, you're told to see yourself in the narrative of Christ. That's the big aha moment. You go, oh, I'm not the hero of the story. It doesn't revolve around me. Wow, right? And then like when Alan Watts talks about, you know, separating yourself from the ego, or Ram Dass, or any of these people, right? It's like all that self-help, it's all about killing the ego. It's all about removing yourself as the central character of the narrative that you're living in. So branding, I mean, I'm talking too much, but branding does the same thing where they go, you're the hero of the narrative. It's a hero's journey. Like, well, is it? I mean, it's a real question to ask. Is it a hero's journey? And if so, maybe we got the hero wrong. And maybe that's why we're all so anxious and addicted to our phones and massively unhappy, because we fundamentally have the wrong hero. You know, like we're looking at the wrong narrative. So for me, it's, yeah, that's the narrative, but says who? That's what this morning I was guest lecturing for college students in beer tech. And I was telling them, I was like, you know, what you have to realize is like, look around the room, all these stories and narratives and things in the world that you're not happy with, write a different narrative, tell a different, like, just look around, you're in charge. You know what I mean? Like, don't give the control. Like every narrative was just, you know, it's just some dude in a room going like, I'll bet you if we tell them, they'll feel fulfilled from buying the shoe, it'll work. And then we all go like, but you got to have Nikes. Well, says who? Like who said?
Yes, that's who. And it's interesting because Abraham Hicks says something very, very similar about truth and what is truth. Truth is just something that someone or a group of people have put so much energy and attention towards that it has manifested into what feels like the truth. This is the solitary truth. Everyone's put their energy towards it. So this must be the way that it is because that's where everybody is believing towards this direction. But that doesn't mean that you can't put that same energy towards something that feels better, higher, more for your highest good, something that actually makes you into a better version of yourself, even if it's contrary to what the accepted truth is. Even if, to put it in the terms of a story, the story that's being told is the one that everybody is believing in, but now you want to tell a different one, go ahead and tell that new story.
Yeah.
But my question for you is, you said, well, there's all these bullshit narratives. How do you know which one is bullshit narrative and which one isn't? Because often that's where people get stuck. You're talking about, I don't believe in killing the ego. I believe in taking control of it because I believe that the ego has a powerful place as long as it's in its place. But its voice sounds like our own. So inside your head, at least for most of us, all of the voices in our head are variations of our own voice. So it's sometimes very difficult to tell whose story we are telling and if it really is the one that we want to tell. How do you make that differentiation?
I mean, it's trial and error, I think. You know, I don't think anyone does it flawlessly. If we did, I would be, you know, who knows? I mean, I'd be floating across water, you know what I mean? Like it's obviously like, you know, the path to enlightenment is enlightenment, as they say. It's like, it's a journey, but I think a lot of the times it feels bad. I think a lot of times, like when you're, you know, I can remember, I'll say this, I can remember getting some of my earliest agency jobs in California. And I can remember, I'm from basically just south of Milwaukee, right? And I can remember people in the room talking about like Trump country, or talking about the Midwest and what people there want and what their intelligence was and what all these things. And I remember sitting there going like, and I remember going like, but it's me, right? And this is why like representation and like advocacy matters so much, because somebody in the room who can go like, that's not actually what the experience of this is, But I can remember how certain everybody was, certain that anyone who grew up how I grew up would come with certain perspectives and views. And it just felt wrong. It just didn't feel accurate. And then the benefit of growing up like me, I grew up with, I had immigrant grandparents. I had seekers in my family who were studying different religions and were looking for the path forward. And so when somebody told me that this religion acts like this, I was like, no, they don't. Like when somebody told me this country, everyone from this country thinks this, that's not, but I've known people from there. Like that's not, so it's like, I think you start by dissecting the monolithic narratives because they're never accurate. Like, only, I mean, I don't know. It's like when, like when a person is saying, all women feel this way or all men feel this way, or it's just like, it's never true. It's never completely true.
No, I find that to be a very accurate statement. Now, we've talked so far about stories kind of like at a high level, right? These are stories and your thoughts on stories and truths and narrative, which I've been thoroughly enjoying. But now we're going to get a little bit more personal now. A little bit more personal. We're getting into you. And I want you to tell us a story about a pivotal moment in your life and how it shaped you.
It's there's so many of them, right? And it's interesting because whichever one you choose becomes now the narrative that everybody listening to this will see me through, right? So it's like there's good and there's bad ones. There's like part of the way that I don't respect part of the reason I don't respect narratives as authoritative is because when I was a teenager of the 90s. I got exposed to like DIY punk when I was 12 years old. And the external locus of what is popular, what matters, what's real, what counts, what doesn't was shattered. It all became an internal locus overnight because the band that I paid $5 to see was more important than the band on MTV. And the band whose record I bought was better than the band who was on the radio. And it completely shifted the entire focus of the rest of my life, where I went like, there's a Fugazi lyric where they say, never mind what's been selling, it's what you're buying. And it's like, that became everything. It's like, it's like the cool story, bro thing, it's like, it all becomes that. And it all becomes kind of silly. And that's why you get the benefit of like, in the old Kung Fu movies, there's always like the laughing monk, right? Or in the Lion King, there's Rafiki, who's just has more perspective. And so everything's a joke to him, and it's like, that's where you want to get. And that became between growing up doing martial arts and then finding punk music, and there's a lot of genres that do it for people. It doesn't have to be punk. It's just that's the one I found, but it just completely shifted everything to like, I didn't turn on MTV to see what was good. I didn't turn on the radio to see what to like. I didn't go to the mall to see how to dress. Like it all became like, well, this is what we do. This is our thing. And, there's a negative tribalism that happens there too. That's not, there's nothing's infallible, but it's just, for me, it was probably the most pivotally valuable thing to happen, because then when I got older and I entered the world trying to work and function and, because I was going to punk shows that I was 15 or whatever in Chicago, and there would be a booth that would have pamphlets about anti-racist action. It would have pamphlets about saving the rainforest from McDonald's. It would have pamphlets about veganism, about helping somebody get out of jail who was wrongly incarcerated. And like, and they were all free. So you'd go, it was, social media at the time was all flyers. So I'd go and I'd pick up every one of them, throw them in my bag, and I'd go home and I would lay on my bed and read them all. And so all the narratives after that, what are you going to tell me? Like, I've already got better information. And, so that I think is probably, as far as like the pivotal moment that shaped my adulthood. Now there's a bunch of negative ones too. I mean, we can do therapy, but like that would be like a really positive, one of those things where it's like somebody turned the light on, okay, wow. Now there's alternatives to whatever you're being fed. There's an alternative and you can find it. It's not always easy, but you can,
You can. And I really love that. And it's, you're right. It is probably the narrative that everyone will now see you through, but it's a good one. If you had to pick one, you pick a good one.
Awesome.
If you, though, are talking about a narrative that is based on expansion in the sense of the word, expanded your mind past what was conventional, allows you to see something different, give you a different perspective. There's always two sides to the story. In that story, or maybe in another story, the way that you are seeing life, did you then also develop limiting beliefs and behaviors related to those experiences?
Well, one of the backdraft kind of black holes of punk is that you learn to automatically discredit things that are popular a lot of the times, especially when you're young, because you find or at least for me, I can't speak for anyone else, but as a 14-year-old or whatever, 15-year-old, causation and correlation are pretty muddy. So automatically, the music on the radio is worse, and it, I remember, like, I can remember being exposed to sort of like mainstream hip hop when I was around the same age, right? You couldn't avoid it. Like in the early 90s, you literally would have had to like try to not listen to rap music. But then rap music started being in skate videos, and it wasn't the same stuff on the radio. It was Tribe Called Quest and Farside and all this stuff. And then it was like, well, this is the same as punk. This is brilliant. I love this, and it's like, so you start finding that version in all these different subcultures. And then the downside is you have so much evidence that the underground, less popular version is better, that something might come out like, say, Weezer or an Anderson .Paak or somebody who's like, has all the DNA of everything you like, is as good as everything you like, but I don't know, something's got to be off. Something's got to be off with these guys, because why would they be so popular? And that is the limiting thing that you go through a couple of years when you dive into subculture that deeply. At least I did. I mean, I can't. Who knows what other people do? But for me, I definitely liking Metallica or something. Like, it wasn't until I was a few years older where I was allowed to go like, oh yeah, that is a good song, or whatever it is, Grateful Dead or something. I hated the Grateful Dead when I was young. I hated it. It was like it was the epitome of everything that I thought was wrong with music, just like stoner, whatever culture. I just didn't like it at all. And then like 24 or something, some song came on and I was like, this is great. What's this? Grateful Dead? It's like, I don't know. It's like, there's good stuff everywhere. I think that the lesson is there's good stuff anywhere. And the monolithic narrative, to fight the monolithic narrative, it's like the ends of the horseshoe. Like, you end up in the same place with like a dogmatic narrative in your life that's causing you to miss things, beautiful things, And so that would be the black hole that sometimes gets drugged behind that sort of subculture immersion. But
how would your narrative have changed if someone that you really, really liked all of a sudden got really popular? Someone in that subculture blew up and is now, number one on a Billboard chart. Would you have followed them in their rise, or would you have thought that something was innately then had become wrong with them because they were no longer part of that culture?
I mean, I would love to say that I would have followed him. You know what I mean? I would love to say that I would have been like, oh, this is, but at 14, no way. And I mean, it happened. There were bands that came out of the scenes that I was around that did end up on MTV. And I didn't keep listening to them. I didn't boycott them. I just was like, it was more of like, well, that's over. Like, I don't know how to explain it. Like, well, okay, well, now that's that now, but that's
well, it's interesting.
Sorry, go ahead.
It's interesting because you're talking about the stories that we tell ourselves and the power of them, and the story that you were telling yourself about needing to be part of a subculture in order to be any good is a similar story that I think a lot of people tell themselves. You need to fit into these parameters in order for my story to feel like it intersects with your story in any meaningful way. And it's interesting because a lot of the times people do not often look at what those parameters are or even realize that they're up. Then they come in the form of biases. They come in the form of culture. They come in the form of history. They come in the form of family. And those parameters with which you set up for yourself are often like glass. Like you don't even see that they're there until you hit them and you run into them. And most of the time people hit them, run into them, and then just turn right back around and to stay in their little box because it's much easier and better. But it sounds like you hit them and smashed through a few. What helped you be able to break the boundaries and the barriers around the narratives that you allowed into your experience?
Honestly, I think it's my interest in like mysticism, like spirituality, because I didn't grow up in a family where I don't know. This is a dangerous subject because you're going to offend people, but I didn't grow up in a family where Jesus was packageable, or church was a building, or God had a name. You know what I mean? Any of this. I mean, you can take it as far as you want, but I grew up with kind of more of a perspective that there was an unknown mysticism to it all. And that anything we were grasping for shape and order within it was a little bit futile and a little bit comical. And it wasn't something my parents sat me down and taught me. It was just that like they were, they explored things. They were Hare Krishnas. They were Christians. They were, they explored things. And so and then when you grow up in intersectional family where you have people from a different country, you have different religions, you have your family's not monolithic, right? So when you grow up with that, the world's giant. It's such a big place. And so one of the hardest things for kids is when the world they grow up in is, whether it's through lack of opportunity or through rigid thinking or through whatever it is, when it's tiny. When you're in a situation where you're fighting, I never got in a fight with anybody over who was the best band in town or who was the coolest kid on the block. Like that was ludicrous to me. I was wondering what they were doing at Shaolin temples. You know what I mean? Like it was like, the world was gigantic. And so, yeah, the narratives we tell ourselves and the limitations that we set, a lot of times what's nefarious about it is it is actually built by excitement. It's not built by limited thinking. It's not built by malice. It's built by excitement. I was so excited that I found music in my region that was being made by people who were a couple years older than me, that spoke to my situation. It was progressive and it was avant, but it was blue collar and gritty, and it just had everything that my life was. And I was so excited to find it that turning on MTV and seeing somebody throw money around or seeing some rock band have like Harley Davidsons and chicks, like it had nothing to do with my life. Like why would I like that? I don't see myself in that. But again, because of the excitement, the perspective can get narrow. And it's our duty. Krishnamurti talks about how the conclusion mind is dead, right? Like you have to, it's our duty as human beings to stay in a state of not living through conclusions. And it's very difficult. And especially if you work in branding and marketing, because it's all about conclusions. It's all about data. It's all about but I mean, we can talk about the process of branding and marketing if you want, but I got plenty to say about that, but it's our duty to try. If there's any theology or philosophy or knowledge that is limiting, it is the belief that exposure and expansiveness of thought is somehow going to be a negative thing. It's never negative.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
I'm firmly in the don't ban any books category. It's just, and if there's, same with religion, read all of it. That's what I would say. You know what I mean? You don't think God can handle you reading about a different God? That's ridiculous to me. But these are the narratives. Grow up, you go, don't backslide. Don't backslide.
Yes. What? For sure.
From where? Where do you think we are that we can backslide anywhere from? Exactly. That's my question always. Backslide from what? We're a bunch of people on a rock floating through space. None of it makes sense. Where are we going to, all we're trying to do is understand, and what God's going to be mad about that? I don't get it. I just really fundamentally never understood it. So, but it was because of the framework that I grew up in. And so I was lucky for that, I believe. And so, but it was just when things get dogmatic, I tend to bounce. So the thing that saved me from getting super rigid with my musical tastes or my whatever is just when it became dogmatic, I went, oh, I've seen where this goes.
I'm taking another path out.
Yeah. And it's about jobs too. It's when you go work for somebody, and it's we're a family and we're all wear the same shirt and everybody's, it's whoa, this is a job, guys. We're here to do some work. Let's do some good work and let's make it count. But this is not, it's not healthy if this is your identity. It's not good for you.
Right.
It'll affect your work. You're not going to do your best. So that's
you've given us so many amazing things to think about and talk about. Are there any other closing final thoughts about your story, storytelling, narrative disruption, mysticism, Hare Krishna, any of the things that you'd like to leave our listeners here with?
I would just like to say to just take your narrative back. It's yours. And it's difficult, don't, if you are listening to this, don't think that I'm doing a great job of it every day. I'm not. That's why I'm talking about it, to encourage myself, and you'll find most people in life who are doing anything where they have a message or they have something they want to get across, it's because that's been a struggle for them, and they want to help and be useful and and that's all we really should want, it's if you can't reduce the suffering of others, at least don't increase it. And that is sort of as you're attacking the narratives in your life and attacking the narrative strategy that you want to try to put into your life, I think, that's the biggest thing is start by deconstructing the monolithic ideas that they're just never true. There's just never, ever. And so you start with those ones where if you catch yourself saying always, never, if you catch yourself doing that, and that's something that my mom always holds me accountable for. She always tells me, don't say never, because I'll be AI is coming and there's never going to be another writing job. And then she'll be don't say never, and I'm yeah, you're right. But it's it's a struggle for all of us because it's in Krishna consciousness, they say there's three gateways to hell. There is basically lust, which is desire. The second gateway is anger for not getting that which you lust after. And the third is greed for getting what you lust after. And it's no coincidence that branding and marketing plays those three doorways like an instrument. And that's their main insights. Every branding meeting you're ever in plays on one of those insights. You feed people's you feed people's anger and their, oh, I should have this. I deserve that. That's all that stuff. It's entitlement. It's the negative ego, like what you were saying earlier. Then greed is, indulgence, more, just more, right? And then, lust and desire is sort of, every religion agrees that that's a problem. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know who can justify that one, but I'm sure whatever, but you think about that, and the counterbalance for all of that is to see yourself in a narrative where what you're doing, how you're moving through the world is expansive and not causing harm. It's not consumeristic. Like, those are also consumer traits, right? I'm sorry, this is going too long, but I would just say, be mindful of the outcome of the narrative that you're believing and take control of your narrative and the best you can. And try to encourage somebody next to you when you see them buying into something that's not useful to say, hey, look, like, you're enough, you're all right. Like, you don't need whatever, to feel valuable. And we find ourselves in all these subcultures and all these groups because we're excited to finally find something that resonates so deeply with us, right? Like, I didn't find punk music because I hated anything. I didn't hate anything, I just found something this is for me, like, and so, but if you stay on the looking for things that are expansive to your perspective, then you keep evolving and keep moving through stuff. If you it's a colonialism. Like, if you find a piece of land and put up a fence and call it yours, it's not, that's conclusion thinking, as Krishnamurti would say, and that belongs to a dead mind. So you got to just keep moving, but I feel like I'm kind of trailing off, so I'll probably call it there.
I love it. You said so many things, so many concluding and final thoughts. I appreciate everything that you have said, and I appreciate you for being here on the podcast, giving us some amazingly different and expansive ways to think through the stories that we're telling, believing, sharing, and participating in. So thank you so much for being here with us today.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was great. It was great speaking with you. I've really enjoyed it.
Yeah. My goodness, my brain and heart both feel 2 sizes bigger than they did before this conversation with Noah. Wow. Isn't the information that he provided and the topics that he explored, aren't they really all saying what we kind of love to say here? Is that story, and the story that you tell yourself is incredibly important, and how you tell that story and to whom you tell the story and what part of the story you believe is incredibly important, not only to attracting the abundance that you seek in life, but helping you go through life and helping you leave a legacy that you can be proud of. It's amazing when he's been talking about how we can use our stories and how his upbringing and his love for music and punk music helped craft his identity. It was amazing to me how I could see so much of my story in his story. No, I did not grow up blue collar. No, I do not have an affinity for punk music, but isn't that the power of story? Where we can see ourselves in other stories by the emotional connection that they provide. I do understand feeling a part of something, needing to be part of something, understanding how to explore alternatives to what is the readily accepted truth. It's amazing to me how often we miss the connection because we get so caught up in the details of the story. If I got caught up in Noah's connection, a detail about the punk rock situation, I would have missed all of the beauty. And if that happened to you because you're like, I don't like punk rock, I'm just listening to this because I can't reach the pause button right now because I'm jogging on this treadmill and I don't want to get out of my stride. If that was you, I encourage you to go back and listen and see how you can find connections to his story, to your story, and how then as you go throughout your day and your life, you can become better connected to the stories of others without getting caught up in the details, without putting those boundaries around yourself and your narrative. Also, while you're doing that, go ahead, like and subscribe so you can tune in for even more amazing conversations like the one that we just had here with Noah. Until next time, my name is Alea Harris, and this is the Flourishing Entrepreneur podcast, and I'm wishing you, my dear, dear listener, lots of love, light, and abundance. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the Flourishing Entrepreneur podcast with Alea Harris. Vibing with what you hear? Leave a 5-star review to spread the love, and be sure to click subscribe. We wish you love, light, and abundance. See you next time.